Hello, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. Welcome to this webinar. We're really excited to have you with us to take part in this learning journey on innovative financing for water security through an IWRM approach. My name is Colin Heron, and I'm the Senior Water Resources Management Specialist on water solutions for the SDGs at the Global Water Partnership in Stockholm. This event is part of efforts to accelerate progress on financing as one of the 5 accelerators of the Global Acceleration Framework on SDG 6. We hope that you will find this event and this learning journey useful and relevant. I'd like to quickly go through some house rules before we get started in earnest. And starting with the fact that we will have Spanish interpretation available. If you need that, then please click on the icon, the one that looks like a little world, which has interpretation, and choose the language that you require. We will have English and Spanish, and you can go between the 2 channels or stay with one. All participants will be muted during the plenary, except for the designated speakers. If you have any comments or questions, which we hope you will have, then please use the chat function. During this session, we will try to get through as many of the questions as we can, but we recognize that we only have 90 minutes. So those questions that we don't get to during this session, we will take them afterwards in the Community of Practice, which you are all warmly invited to. And if you have any problems with the connection, then Mario Lamban is your man. So I just wanted to quickly walk us through the schedule for today's session. We will start with some opening comments. If Mario, you could go on to the next slide, please. We'll start with some, sorry, Sandra, if you can go on to the next slide. We will start with some opening comments anyway, just to get us in the mood and set the scene. Following those opening comments, which will be from a representative of GWP and our partners at UNEP DHI, we will then go into a high-level panel discussion with 3 excellent experts that we're really honored to have with us today. We will then have an opportunity for you to ask those questions to our experts, both in the plenary, and then we will break into 3 separate breakout groups where you can have a discussion to share experiences, to ask deeper questions, and interact along the different themes that are related to those breakout groups. And we will have some closing explaining how this wonderful journey that we're starting today will continue over the coming 4 months and how you can contribute to the shared learning that we will all experience. So with that, and now you know why we're here and who I am, now's the time to know who you are. So if we can go to the icebreaker, please. We have 2 questions for you. The first is just to know where are you in the world today? So if you can go to polev.com/GWP, the address should be available in the chat. You can also see it on screen. And by doing so, you can hopefully click on the map to show your location. And this is to see a little bit where people are calling from today. So we have a few from Spain, from the sort of Middle East region, Northern Europe. We have Canada, we have middle of the US. We have okay, now it's more people popping up in Central America. I see a few in, a good few in South America now. That's very good to see the spread of participants all over the world. We have some people in North Africa as well. We have Southern Europe, so it's a very good mix. This is partly to know where you're calling from and partly to see if the technology is working. We now have a second question, which is more substantive. And this is that this learning journey will take on a series of different topics in 2-week focuses, which we hope will be interesting for all of you. And to make this relevant to your work, we would like to ask you to vote for the topics of your choice. We have 13 options on the screen, and you can choose any 3 topics. We also had a session this morning, and we will collate the results of this morning's and this afternoon's session, this morning Stockholm time, that is, and come up with the winners, which will be the topics for future sub-themes within our learning journey. So if you see any of these that you're particularly interested, you can vote for them, and we will give you a few seconds more to do so. This is not a popularity contest, but it's more just to understand the demand from your side so that we can provide the information that you are looking for. So with that, and I think we could possibly still go on for a lot longer, but time is short today, so we will move ahead, please, with the next part of this opening session, which I want to see if Ralph is now online.
Yep, I'm here,
yes, Colin. Yes, Ralph, over to you, please. Ralph Philip is the interim COO of the Global Water Partnership based here in Stockholm. So Ralph, over to you for your opening remarks.
Many thanks, Colin, and a warm welcome to everyone on behalf of the Global Water Partnership and the SDG 6 IWRM support program. It's an honor to open this event, which I think everyone would acknowledge now is an extremely important topic, particularly how we view it from GWP's perspective and in terms of accelerating countries' ability in order to meet their SDG challenges. I'm sure many of you are aware of the SDG 6 IWRM support program. This is a program that has been run jointly between Global Water Partnership, UNEP DHI Center, and UNDP CapNet since 2017. So it's been ongoing for about 5 years now. In that time, we've very much focused on supporting countries to monitor their progress towards integrated water resources management as measured through the indicator 6.5.1, the SDG indicator 6.5.1 on progress in the implementation of IWRM. We've also used the results coming out from that monitoring to support countries to develop action plans, IWRM action plans to identify solutions and priorities in order to address the shortfalls that they've seen coming out of the priorities that they've seen coming out of the indicator monitoring. And then the final step of the program is to support the implementation of these actions, implementation of these solutions, and that's really where this webinar fits in, because that relates very much to mobilizing the finance and providing the necessary support that countries need to start actually putting these action plans into practice. I think that aspect of it, the financing of the SDG implementation, that's obviously something that's well recognized as being probably the biggest challenge in order to achieve the SDGs, particularly SDG 6 on water. There's a lot of statistics that will show us that there's significant shortfalls in water investments at this time. And if we're serious about reaching the SDG targets, it's those shortfalls in financing that have to be addressed. We've seen this coming out of the SDG support program, and hence is why we've looking to set up an innovative approach to mobilize this finance and to find ways of filling this gap. And that's really the starting point here for this learning journey, as Colin said. It's looking to bring different stakeholders together, bring different ideas together to encourage knowledge exchange around this topic, and to really look at developing more of a community of practice that brings in new ideas, brings in new innovative ways of exploring how this financing gap that exists that's currently preventing us from reaching the SDG targets, how we can really look to fill that. So I know we don't have much time today, and there's a lot to discuss, so I don't think I'll take up any more of your time, but other than to say I'm very much looking forward to this event. I expect there to be very rich discussions, as there were this morning in the earlier event that we held. And I think with that, I'll hand back over to you, Colin, to take us forward to the next step of the agenda. Many thanks.
Many thanks, Ralph. That's excellent. So please be welcomed, all of you, to this learning exchange. And now to go a little bit deeper into what we mean in terms of financing and what is the reason for us being here. I'd like to invite my good friend and colleague Maya Bertule from UNEP DHI Center to please give us a 7-minute presentation on financing for IWRM as evidenced through the SDG 6.5.1 monitoring. So Maya, over to you.
Great, thanks, Colin, and thank you for having me in this very exciting session here today. I am Maya Bertule. I'm Senior Technical Advisor at the UNEP DHI Center. And as Ralph mentioned, we've been very happy in collaborating with the partners on the IWRM support program, but also in supporting UNEP in the global data collection and analysis on indicator 6.5.1, which is the SDG 6 indicator on the degree of implementation of IWRM. If we go to the next slide, just wanted to mention that the indicator at the global plane has been reported on twice. First time, the baseline reporting in 2017, and our latest reporting took place in 2020. And for both years, for each of years, in fact, we received more than 170 country reports. So we do have quite a solid data set for our analysis on the global degree of implementation of IWRM. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with indicator 6.5.1, it is based on a survey questionnaire. So all UN member states report on this indicator using a survey questionnaire with 33 questions. The questionnaire is organized in 4 dimensions, and one of these dimensions is in fact financing, or financing for IWRM. And it has 6 questions that cover both national financing and budgeting aspects, and also subnational ones, as well as transboundary. And a lot of the data are sourced using stakeholder consultations. So it's not just the national focal points, but it does receive inputs from a number of stakeholders in the countries. Next slide, please. On this slide, you can see just a snapshot of the final indicator, so indicator overall results globally for year 2020. And on a scale of 0 to 100%, 100% being very high degree of implementation of IWRM, globally, you see there's quite a lot of difference between countries, but the global average score is 54%. So this is the average of all the 33 questions. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the indicator result overview by question. And this is organized in ascending order. And as you can see, the highlighted questions here are all the questions from the financing dimension. And for both reporting years, consistently, we've had the lowest scores for financing aspects of IWRM, which indicates that this is one of the more challenging aspects in furthering the implementation, accelerating implementation of integrated water resources management. If we just move to the next slide, of course, the question is, what does this mean for accelerating implementation of IWRM and how we move towards the target of very high degree of implementation in 2030 as per the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. Of course, more funding is an important question and challenge highlighted by many countries that report on the indicator. But if we just move forward, we can also see that there are many other aspects of financing that we need to address. And these are based both on the challenges that countries note in their responses, but these are also based on the successful examples, if you will, from countries that have managed to secure financing or secure sufficient financing for various integrated water resources management activities and have achieved relatively higher scores for the financing dimension. And few of the aspects of what improved financing for IWRM in this context mean are improved management of already existing funds, so making sure that the existing resources are in fact directed towards activities that support implementation of IWRM. This also includes improved capacity to absorb and disperse funding. So looking at the institutions that are tasked with supporting IWRM implementation and making sure that when they do have the resources available, they have the capacity to absorb and use these towards relevant activities. We also see both examples and challenges in better and broader revenue raising mechanisms. And related to that, legal and regulatory frameworks that support establishment and use of these kind of mechanisms, apart from just centralized budget allocations. In the spirit of IWRM, of course, we also see potential gains in coordinated finance planning, not only across different water resources management challenges and activities, but also across sectors. So identifying where there are opportunities to plan and coordinate use of financing that would have gains across water and other sectors. And of course, improved accounting where this is required, and advocacy. And advocacy is a very important one in relation to making sure that there is clear understanding at the higher policy decision-making levels of why IWRM is important and why dedicated funding for activities is important, not only for water, but in fact across all the sectors. So if we move to the next slide, this is just a short overview of the supporting actions that have been identified as a result of the global data drive. Just quickly going through these with one eye on the time, as I mentioned, of course, we do need to look at increasing direct investment that is backed by good policy, good water policy that recognizes IWRM. We also see the need and value in raising revenue from both traditional and non-traditional water and ecosystem services. Of course, as I mentioned, also across all of these transparency, anti-corruption, and accountability actions. At given time, also looking into opportunities and leveraging opportunities from recovery support packages, such as COVID-19, financing for rebuilding, for natural disasters. And as I also mentioned, improving coordination and prioritization of funds across sectors. There are a lot of win-win opportunities here, climate change adaptation and poverty reduction financing being the obvious ones. And finally, of course, increasing investments from donors and banks. On the next slide, just a few links to the resources, both on IWRM data portal and a support program. I'm sure these are already posted in the chat. But with that, I'm again saying thank you for the possibility to join the conversation, and yeah, looking forward to a good discussion. Thanks very much. Back to you, Colin.
Thank you so much, Maya, and excellent presentation as well. And hopefully that's got everyone in the mood. I hope that you're also noting any questions or doubts that you have. And as we move now into the panel, we will have 3 experts who we're very pleased to have with us today, who will be giving us a perspective on this very challenge, which is very broad. And we've seen that there's a need to drill down further on some of the specific topics, which we will ask our experts to do. And of course, the conversation will be going on even after today. But to get us started, I'd like to introduce the 3 wonderful people who will have in this panel. Diego Rodriguez is currently leading a lead water economist in the World Bank for Eastern and Southern Africa, based in Pretoria, where he's responsible for analytical work on climate change, resilience, and urban water security. At the global level, he leads an initiative on water in the circular economy and resilience. Second, we have Rukan Manaz, who's an experienced professional in international cooperation and sustainable finance. As part of the local transformative finance practice at UN Capital Development Fund, UNCDF, based in New York. She's in charge of the Blue Peace Financing Initiative and other projects in the field of financing for water. And last but not least, we have Alex Money, the best named panelist we could have for today's session, who's a program director at the University of Oxford, where his research interests include finance, water, and sustainable development. He wears many hats, including being a co-investigator at the Center for Greening Finance and Investment, a trustee of the Uptime Catalyst Facility, and the co-founder and CEO of Oxford Earth Observation. So what we are going to do in this panel is that we have an opening question, which we will be asking all three of our panelists to answer in 3 minutes. Then we'll open up for some further questions, and I would like to invite all of our participants to please write down any questions they have in the chat. We will try to take as many of them as possible during this panel session. But the first question that we are going to ask is, okay, here it is. What do you consider the key to unlocking finance for water security through an IWRM approach? And I'd like to ask first Rukan, then Alex, and then Diego to reflect on that question. So Rukan, over to you, please. 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Colin. And I just want to say thank you for having me here. I'm really happy and honored to be part of this very interesting journey. So to come to your question, I would like to highlight 3 important points regarding this aspect. So first of all, I think we need to start by better understanding the financial ecosystem, how it works, how it approaches water, and how it needs to change. The second point is, in order for this to change, we need to create transboundary and multi-sectoral cooperation frameworks based on an IWRM approach. And then the third point I want to highlight is, in order for us to do so, we need to have strong political will and enabling environments to be in place. And I would just like to go a little bit more into detail on these 3 points. So first of all, as I mentioned, we need to understand the current financial ecosystem, because as of now, the way it works, it works very well for big companies and sovereign states. It provides a good investment framework for national investments, but it becomes rather difficult when we think about regional or transboundary investments, because the process of mobilizing resources in the current financial ecosystem, it's quite inefficient when it comes to assets that are shared by multiple countries, because the investment flows is not transboundary. Usually it goes through the Ministry of Finance of each sovereign state. And also often the risk perception towards transboundary investments are very high. So the dilemma we face here is basically there is a lack of alignment between, on the one hand, the financial ecosystem, which functions within the boundaries of sovereign states and sectorial thinking. On the other hand, we have the nature of water resources, which actually does not know any of these national or sectoral boundaries, right? And this is why the IWRM approach is so important, because it breaks down exactly these kind of boundaries. So we really need to think about changing the approach of the financial sector towards water using the IWRM approach, because we need long-term transboundary and multi-sectorial thinking and investing, as opposed to short-term national or sectoral investment, which is often the case right now. And to get there, we need the IWRM approach to create these transboundary multi-sectoral cooperation frameworks, because this will also help to reduce the risk perception that we have right now when it comes to transboundary investments. And we also need to create these cooperation frameworks within a strong enabling environment. So we need to have strong political will in place, and we especially need legal and policy frameworks that are enabling for these cooperation frameworks. And I think to get there, we also need to highlight the benefits for all stakeholders. The IWRM approach can actually provide a win-win situation for all stakeholders, including investors, because as I mentioned, it will reduce the risk perception. So we really need to show this win-win situation, and especially sovereign state and policymakers, they need to understand the benefits of these cooperation frameworks for environmental, economic, but also social development of their own states, its population, but for the whole region. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rukan, and very interesting points there that I would like to invite Alex and Diego to also build upon. Just highlighting that there are adjustments that may be needed within the finance sector, also within the water community. And I think one point that came from this morning's session is connectors between the two. How can we translate or interpret the needs from one side to the other? So yes, building upon the same question, I'd like to now hand over to Alex to get your 3-minute take on what are the main challenges and what are the main opportunities.
Thanks so much, Colin, and thank you to GWP for this opportunity, which it's a pleasure to participate in. Yeah, I'd like to build pretty much directly on what Rukan has to say. I think one of the challenges which IWRM approaches can directly help is a definitional challenge, and so people speak, pretty interchangeably sometimes between concepts of funding, financing, investment, and so forth. And many of us know that actually these are quite distinct things, right? And, there's a distinction between commercial and concessional funding. There's a difference between repayable and non-repayable finance. These are fundamentally important ideas. And actually IWRM gives, I think as Rukan describes really nicely just a second ago, gives a really helpful framework to try to contextualize what the investment or the funding requirement is, at what scale does it operate, to whom are the lines of accountability visible to, who are the beneficiaries, what are the modalities of payment or repayment. And using that, I think would help practitioners in the financial services sector who just do not have that level of specificity in terms of knowledge and understanding of these distinctions, to be able to better allocate capital efficiently and the right sorts of capital for the appropriate opportunities. And so I think IWRM is an underutilized framework to actually meaningfully change that definitional challenge, which I would argue is one of the core impediments in mobilizing more funding at scale, which came up, I think, in the poll that you did at the start here. I have more things to say about some of the specific challenges around crowding out and the allocation challenge, incentives, specification, and so forth. But maybe we can come into that if the audience questions take us there. So really, the point I'd like to reiterate is the intrinsic value that IWRM as a framework approach can bring to facilitating a better understanding amongst the purveyors and providers of finance as to the appropriateness of investment or funding in different forms of water-related infrastructure and services. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Alex. Bang on the money, I would say. And Diego, it would be great to get your perspective on what are the keys to unlocking. We've heard that IWRM has great potential, but it's not happening at the scale that we require. And as a representative of the World Bank and somebody that also has a great track record working on this, what do you see as the keys to unlocking greater financing or funding or investment or capital, whatever term we choose to use?
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and thanks also for the nice invitation. It's been a while since I'm in the IWRM discussions, so it's nice to be back. I'll concentrate on three issues from at least the challenges that we see as financiers, and also creating and developing all this lending with the government, lending projects. The first one, I think, and building upon the first presentation by Maya, is this issue of, I don't think it's an issue of additional funding necessarily, always. In our experience, we conduct a lot of these exercises that we call the public expenditure reviews in governments, in which we track a bit how the existing funding and the public resources are being implemented by different sectors. And what you find is, as usually in most of our client countries, there is very limited capacity to implement the scarce resources that they have in the sector today, right? So it's not unusual to see large and dispersed amounts, projects not implementing, designing of projects that takes years, very lengthy procurement processes, and that is something that needs to change. There is a lack of knowledge in the sector, I think, or what it means funding, and I think Alex alluded to this, funding and financing, what it means, what it really takes to bring additional resources. There is perception in the sector that most of the financing or the funding has to come from public resources and through taxes. For political reasons, we cannot adjust tariffs. So there's this perception that governments plan and invest based on this fallacy that the government will finance your entire package of needs and investments. And that brings a lag in investments. So we are lagging behind rehabilitation of existing infrastructure. We are lagging behind new projects. New projects ideas take a very long time to be designed and implemented. My second point, I think, is a big problem of what we call sort of the bankability of projects. Project preparation is very, very weak in the sector. We have to be much more aware of the different funding sources that we have, and that those funding sources, whether it's public or private, have different eligibility criteria, right? So the design of those projects with solid financing structuring is usually lacking, and that obviously impedes governments to be able to access other funding and financing mechanisms. And my third point is, I think that we need what I would call the modernization of IWRM, right? I think that there is a lot of perception from governments that IWRM becomes a very complex program or process, that we need to include every single sector in the discussion. Governments are basically organized by silos. There are very limited incentives for governments to do this cross-sectoral collaboration. But I think that we have a very good momentum on certain issues. No? So bringing to this to the existing IWRM processes, for example, much more rigorosity in how we look at resilience and robustness, the contribution of the water sector to both mitigation and adaptation, not only adaptation, issues of circularity, circular economy, and how you can bring additional benefits to a large city, for example. This allows you to basically, and related to my previous comment, will allow you to bring an array, capture an array of benefits and co-benefits that are more attractive to different financing sources, right? So being able to bring much more rigorous assessments on the climate change side will allow us to tap maybe into the GCFs and other private sources. Issues of circularity, you can have access to energy sources, funding sources, for example, and so on. So I think the modernization of the IWRM has to take place, taking advantage of the current opportunities. Thank you.
Well, Diego, as always, impressive and a lot to unpack in those comments. And I would like to invite, again, the audience to share any questions they have for the speakers. Please do so in the chat, and we will try to get to them during this panel, or if not, in the breakout sessions afterwards. Now, one of the items you touched upon is the, do we need more money? And I think I would very much like to hear Alex's view in terms of the private sector in particular, and what is needed to attract private sector investment, and what is the key? What can we as water experts principally do to increase private investment in water security?
Oh, so just giving me the easy questions, I see, Colin. Thanks very much for that. Well, we need more money. I'm notwithstanding Diego's very good point that there are efficiency gains to be made. I think just given the, we don't need to rehearse the arguments as to why water infrastructure needs better investment to on the resource and services side. But I think there's to keep this brief. I think there's a prevailing wisdom which I would just challenge in two specific areas. One is this sort of this orthodoxy that is kind of developed, that actually the big challenge is bankability, and intrinsically, of course, you know, we all understand the argument that if you don't present a project in a way that financiers can model it and process it, it's going to be challenging. But I think one of the problems when people talk about bankability is that, and this is not exclusively true, but in many cases, particularly for investments that are needed in many developing parts of the world, the hurdle rate, right, the required rate of return that is often set by funders or financiers or investors is a very very high rate, right? Being set at those rates, reflecting some sense of risk premium and whatnot. And these are projects that are very, very challenging to deliver the returns that hurdle rate would expect. And I think that framing of what bankability can and should mean needs to broaden from thinking exclusively or primarily or mainly just on the financial return on investment, and to think more broadly about other attributes of return that reflect the externalities, the positive externalities, economically, societally, and environmentally, that these funded investments can provide. And then the question is, well, okay, you can maybe come up with a bunch of numbers for that, but that doesn't, you know, where does the money come from? And then the reflection there is to think about two things. One, how concessional capital is used in ways that doesn't crowd out the private sector. So the extent to which concessional capital can be part of that additionality piece. And two, to recognize that increasingly there are sources of finance and funding available from foundations and from corporate philanthropy and other sources, which do target returns that extend beyond financial ROI. This is not. I don't want to conflate this, because I think the nature of the fund flows mean this is still probably marginal rather than the mainstream piece. But it's still important, I think, to be able to introduce to this discussion a variation on this model of bankability and the sort of intrinsic conversation that we keep having, that, well, the problem is no one, it's just not enough bankable projects. I think thinking constructively and creatively, again, with an IWRM framework in mind, about how we present returns on investment or returns on capital that extend beyond financial ROI, will, at the margin at least, be a meaningful contribution to trying to catalyze more flow. Thanks.
Excellent points, Alex. Thanks so much for that. And again, a lot to unpack in all of this. Really, today, I feel we can, at best, scratch upon the surface of the topic, but even doing so will be hopefully enlightening for everyone here. So my next question is for Diego, and Alex mentioned that there are funding streams out there, including non-traditional investment types. You've mentioned, Diego, that the need to improve public expenditure and efficiency of expenditure. But I wanted to ask, how can public revenue streams be best used to attract these non-traditional investments? Is it just a case of doing those investments, using public funding better, or using it differently?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. And I'll probably be building also on some of Alex's comments. I think there is an issue on the public funding side that it's related to Alex's point on the crowding out private financing. I think it's an issue of sometimes using public expenditures in a different way, right? I mean, in many cases, it does not really make a lot of sense for you to use your capital expenditures to build infrastructure, but you can use that public expenditure, for example, to create some guarantee schemes, for example, other funding mechanisms that can provide guarantees to the private sector, for example. And that could be, that's not gray infrastructure, no? But then that means that you need to change policies, existing policies that mainly promote capital expenditures for gray infrastructure by using these scarce public resources. So I think you have to think creatively in how you can use those funding resources to attract other sources of funding. And there are many different instruments that can be used. My other point is on sort of the enabling environment. A lot of the constraints that you face is simply, in many countries, you don't have a water regulator, right? And you're regulating basically by public funding. So you provide capital expenditures and you try to regulate those investments or those utilities through that. And creating that enabling environment and having clarity on the diversification of risk, or which type of risk is absorbed by the public sector, by the private sector, having accountability and transparency and enforcement mechanisms in regulations becomes critical. Nobody will buy something if you're not secured of some returns and then security in the longer term that you will be operating in, right? So I think those two aspects are very important. Thank you.
Excellent points, Diego. And there's been a lot of reference to obviously the national level, which is entirely logical. But Rukan, turning to you, and at the transboundary level, those challenges are obviously exacerbated in many ways. So I wanted to ask, what do you see as the biggest challenge, but also the biggest opportunity in attracting financing at the basin or the transboundary basin level in particular?
Yes, thank you, Colin. I would like to build on what the colleagues have mentioned. We heard the importance of adding attributes to returns, and this is where I think about impact investing. We have a growing interest in the area of sustainable finance on the one hand, but often these impact investors, they actually don't know where to invest or how to invest in these transboundary settings. So there we have a market failure, because in these transboundary settings, if we think about who is embodying the IWRM approach in these settings, they are often river basin organizations or commission, these regional non-sovereign entities. And the biggest challenge is that, although these regional non-sovereign entities, they often these shared water resource, they manage these shared water resources, and they're at the forefront of this IWRM approach and providing water-related services in these transboundary settings, they are usually limited in their ability to fulfill their mandate. First of all, in terms of lack of institutional capacity, but also in terms of mobilizing the necessary financial resources. And the key problem here, and what we call the market failure, is that those regional non-sovereign entities, they actually don't have access to the capital markets. And this is the market failure, but at the same time, this is actually a huge opportunity. If we manage to change this, if we manage to support these river basin organizations to have access to capital markets, we can use the blended finance approach to unlock a lot of private capital that can go into these transboundary settings and that can support this river basin organization and these riparian counties to really realize the IWRM approach. Thank you.
Excellent answers so far. We have about 8 minutes left of this panel, and the time has flown by, but I'd like to turn to some of the questions from the chat that have been coming in from participants. So Sandra, would you mind sharing one or two highlights of the questions from the chat for our panelists?
Yeah, surely. We actually have a few questions, and one question is from a panelist from the morning session that is particularly challenging a bit, Alex and Rukan, and I think we already touched a little bit upon that. But Guy Alerts from IAT Delft, he's saying that we must increase financing flow to water investments, but we must also do more to reduce the financing flow to investments that imperil the water system. So to say, the stupid investments that lower resilience and increase systemic risk. And so this is largely an issue for the corporate and financial sectors, he says. And so how can the water community and the regulators make a dent here? I don't know, Alex, Rukan, if one of you would like to take on that question. And maybe also just to add another question, so you can prepare a little bit for that one. We have another one from Lizzie, I'm not quite sure whether I pronounce you correctly, who is talking about Earth observation. Earth observation is critical towards provision of evidence in mobilizing investments and funding. So how best could this evidence-based practice be brought to the lowest level of natural resources users to enhance their anchored ownership within the water sector?
So who would like to go first in answering those very challenging questions? Rukan, please, ladies first.
Yeah, thanks. I will start with the first question that was raised, and I'm happy if Alex comes in to complement. So I think what is important here is what we already mentioned before. There is, especially in Europe, we have a growing trend in terms of sustainable finance and impact investing. And I think what the water community needs to do is to kind of, we need to build a bridge between these two sectors, right? The water community needs to learn a little bit to understand how the investors community is thinking, their language, in order to really show them why are these kind of investments stupid? What are the risks related to that? Because when we look into the financial sector, there are already a lot of tools that go into, you know, screening what is environmentally risky, social risky. So the ESG investments that we hear all about, right? But often from the investor's perspective, they don't necessarily understand all of the risks that are related and why an energy project that looks very attractive in terms of return of investment might be harmful and therefore not sustainable and you know, in the long term not a wise investment. So I think what I want to say to summarize, we really need to bring these sectors together and help them to understand each other, to make these kind of risks and stupid investments more visible.
And bringing sectors together is exactly what IWRM is supposed to do. So brilliant answer. Thank you. Alex, would you like to build on that?
Sure, I'm happy to try. Well, look, you know, my background's in the capital markets. I was a fund manager before I did all this stuff, and in that context, stupid investments has a very particular meaning. It means investments where you don't make the return that you expect to do for a level of risk. So I mean, you know, there's two ways to answer this. If it's a stupid investment in that the investors haven't thought through the risks, that's one thing. If the point more is that the returns do not recognize negative externalities that are a consequence of that investment being made, so either the return is over exaggerated or the risk is underrepresented, then that's a different thing. I think where there is a negative externality to be recognized, then in most cases there should be a mechanism in which that can be reflected, be it a regulatory mechanism or something else. The challenge is probably more to the point that those externalities aren't being appropriately recognized, and so as a consequence, return relative to risk is being inflated. But I think that's I think there are mechanisms in which that can be done. It's just a question of where and how they're implemented. There are good examples, I think, if you look around the world, where those are being done relatively better or worse. If I may, just to segue from there onto that second question on Earth observation, and I'll put that hat on for a second. You know, we've been working with Earth observation data for for a few years now, and it's I think one of the really interesting. I think this is a really interesting question, because one of the things that we find when you look at things like that is actually the value. The value is a derived value, right? There's nothing intrinsically valuable about Earth observation data. It's only, all of these things are only useful to the extent that they enable something else to happen or not to happen, and that has a consequential benefit or something else. I can give a very specific example. I'll just draw on work that we're doing at Oxford Earth Observation. So right now, and this is specifically to this question. So right now we have a program with the World Food Program. World Food Program makes contingent payments, right? So they make contingent payments to people or to farmers or so on in anticipation of a short-term drought event or something else. And so to prepare and to help communities, they will often engage, and currently they use a meteorological modeling approach to figure out contingent payments. We're working with them in actually, I'm wondering how much I can disclose about this now. We're working with them in a couple of sub-Saharan markets, let me say that, where we're trying to augment the quality of that information they get, rather than simply relying on meteorological data to look at available surface water, which is what we measure at hyperlocal resolution, to try to give a more specific early indicator of upcoming scarcity that can refine the type of contingent payment that gets made. So at its most elemental level, if that approach delivers the results that we hope and WFP hope it does, that does potentially improve the quality of outcome for the communities for whom could benefit from that. So I think there are direct connections between the sort of the stuff that sits out there and real world outcomes. But in nearly every case, as far as we have seen, it's a derived benefit. And then the question is having the right infrastructure and incentives in place for that benefit to be realized. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Alex. And Diego, yes, over to you, and you have 60 seconds for your answer because we're about to close the panel. Okay,
I was trying to complement on the Earth observations issue, just to say that we've been using now, I think for over 10 years, Earth observations in two ways. One for the design of lending, and the second one also to monitor implementation of those investments. So we use it, for example, we have a water accounting tool that allows us to see, for example, benefits of agricultural water management practices. So we measure evapotranspiration in irrigation fields, and we can run the tool in an hour. We can get, it's an ensemble of different satellites, and we have an algorithm that runs extremely fast. So we can run it in an hour. You can have already outputs. We use it for water quality as well. And most recently and for floods and droughts. And most recently, we've been using it to estimate non-revenue water or water supply systems. There are some algorithms that give you very good estimates with a margin of error of a few meters from the spots. So we are trying to use this in a lot of our planning and investments. Thank you.
That's excellent. And I see there are some other questions in the chat, which I hope we can touch upon during the breakout groups, which we're about to start. So I want to thank the three panelists for the moment. This has been enlightening for me, and I hope for the audience as well. And it's not over yet. We will now go out to the break. I think the participants from the other breakout groups are slowly coming back. So I hope that you all had wonderful discussions. Ours was very interesting. And now to conclude the session today, I'd like to hand over to Sandra.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. And I'm trying to bring up my slides here again because we still have something to share with you, because this kickoff webinar has only been the beginning of our learning journey. And we would like to take you to a 4-month learning journey. So this learning journey on innovative financing for water security was kicked off today through this first online event. But we will also continue to do that in online discussions. We will invite you to also join our community of practice, because this whole learning journey will take place on our newly created SDG 6 IWRM community. And I will talk about that more in a second. So there we will have online discussions where we invite members to share experiences on the topic, share resources, case studies, but then also to just exchange with participants on what worked, what didn't work, etc. We will also have, as a continuation, other online events. So not only this kickoff webinar, but we will periodically have other online events dedicated to one theme, dedicated to a region, etc. To hear practical examples also, and to learn again from experts and interact with peers. We will also offer live chat with experts. You already got a bit of a glimpse of that in the breakout groups, and we are very happy that our 3 experts will also be available for a live chat right after this event on the COP. And of course, in this learning journey, you will also have networking opportunities. So by joining the COP, you can actually also chat with your peers, you can connect with peers and really broaden your network and your available resources in your daily work. So this learning journey will take place over the next 4 months from June until September, and you're warmly invited to join that. As said, it is hosted on the the SDG 6 IWRM Community of Practice. And this community of practice is really a community for IWRM practitioners from all over the world. And it has as its objectives, it wants to kind of like enable the learning and sharing of participants and members amongst each other. So learning from experiences, sharing knowledge, sharing also news on the from the subnational to the global levels on challenges and opportunities of IWRM implementation, including financing, but also other topics, of course. Then we also want to enable the fostering of partnership and relationship building through this community of practice, and activate learning opportunities and give guidance to IWRM practitioners to also support their daily work. And this first learning journey on innovative financing is such a learning opportunity also. But of course, this very much depends also on the engagement of the practitioners and on sharing your experiences in that community. So now I'm sure that you're wondering already, how can I join this SDG 6 IWRM Community of Practice? It's a very easy 2-step process. So the community is hosted on the GWP Toolbox, which was recently relaunched, and which does not only host communities of practice, but also has a wide range of instruments and resources available, including case studies on different topics related to IWRM, including financing, but also many, many, many other topics. So you can create a profile on that GWP Toolbox. And once you have created that profile, you can join the SDG 6 IWRM community by clicking on an orange button that will appear that asks you to click to request to join. And we will approve this request as soon as possible. And as soon as this is approved, you will be a member of the SDG 6 IWRM Community of Practice and can start exchanging. So this engagement has various forms. On the community of practice itself, we have different tools available. So members can engage in discussions, in discussion threads on specific topics. They can share experiences, ask questions, provide inputs, comment on others' ideas. They can also share events that are relevant. They can upload resources that are relevant for the community. And of course, they can also engage directly with other members and write to them if needed. There's also an opportunity if participants don't feel very comfortable with engaging in English, there is an opportunity to actually also switch to other languages. So in this red circled illustration there, you see this button that you can click on where you can change languages. So you can actually use this community in whatever language you feel most comfortable in. So We warmly invite you to join this community of practice. We're very much looking forward to having you there. And we want to invite you also in this community of practice actually to engage in a live chat with the experts right after the webinar. So we would like to warmly invite you to register for the community of practice and then to actually join our exclusive live chat with the panelists, where there again are going to be available for any questions that you might have. They will answer, they will comment, they will share ideas, inputs, etc. So please do join us for this live chat. You see all the links, the registration details, and also the links to the live chat posted in the chat. So please just copy those chat links into your server and you will be redirected to the live chat and to the community of practice. So with that, I would like to hand over now to our final speaker. And this has been a very, very rich conversation. And I'm sure that our closing remarks, Joachim Harlin from UNEP, the Chief of Freshwater Ecosystems Unit at UNEP and the Chief Manager at UNEP DHI. I'm sure that you will have lots to say. Unfortunately, only have 3 minutes, but
okay.
Over to you, Joachim.
I'm a practice speed talker. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you all that joined on this learning journey. It is really a journey. And we will continue this journey on innovative financing for water security through an IWRM approach. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And I want to thank you, Sandra, Colin, Maya, Diego, Rukan, Alex, for your excellent inputs that have helped us and to kickstart this journey. A few reflections from today. Well, we need to understand the financial ecosystem. It's not just the freshwater ecosystems, but we need to understand much better how does it work, this financial ecosystem. And we heard also that IWRM could actually be an underutilized framework for mobilizing financing. But then we also concluded, at least in our breakout group, that maybe there's no such thing as an IWRM project. So how do we then go about financing improved coordination? Well, one answer to that would be maybe we have to build synergies across sectors and make sure that the projects that we actually embark on, create those synergies. But then again, how do we then engage government in that process? Because public holdings, there's a risk of corruption if we engage with that, and the private sector is a little bit reluctant to take those kind of risks. So we are facing some challenges here, right? But Diego came up with a couple of solutions, I think, and he talked about that there's actually funding available. Some of this funding is untapped, and maybe if we could increase some capacity and also make the case better and make our projects more bankable, we can tap into funding that is already there. And we also see that we can go beyond our own sector and actually show the value of investing in water security through an IWRM approach, also in relation to other benefits such as climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and circularity. So I think these were some of the take-home messages I got from today, and I hope we can continue this journey together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joachim. Excellent comments to close the session with. And I hope to see many of you now in the community of practice to continue this discussion, both within the next hour with our experts, but also in the coming weeks. So thank you very much. Now we can declare the webinar concluded. Thank you.